Thanks for tuning in to tonight's event. My name is Kevin. I'm one of the event hosts here at Powell's Books. And before we begin, I want to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events by visiting our website at powells.com. And if you don't already do so, please follow us on social medias such as Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, as well as our YouTube channel. Tonight, it's all about exercise as we welcome Bill Hayes and Alison Bechdel in conversation with Bill Goldstein. From Insomniac City author Bill Hayes comes Sweat, Cultural, Scientific, and Personal History of Exercise. Exercise is our modern obsession and an ancient obsession too. But as a chapter in human history, it's been largely overlooked. In his book, Sweat, Hayes runs, jogs, swims, spins, walks, boxes, sweats, and downward dogs his way through the origins of different forms of exercise, chronicling how they have evolved over time, dissecting the dynamics of human movement. Hayes ties his own personal experience and ours to the cultural and scientific history of exercise from ancient times to the present day, giving us a new way to understand its place in our lives in the 21st century. In The Secret to Superhuman Strength, comics and cultural superstar Alison Bechdel, author of Fun Home and Other Hits, delivers a deeply layered story of her fascination from childhood to adulthood, with every fitness craze to come down the pike, from Jack LaLanne in the 60s to the existential oddness of present-day spin class. Readers will see their athletic or semi-active past flash before their eyes through an ever-evolving parade of running shoes, bicycles, skis, and sundry other gear. But the more Bechdel tries to improve herself, the more herself appears to be the thing in her way. She comes to the conclusion that the secret to superhuman strength lies not in six-pack abs, but in something much less clearly defined, facing her own non-transcendent but all-important interdependence with others. Hayes and Bechdel will be joined in conversation tonight by Bill Goldstein. He's the author of the literary history, The World Broken Two, as well as a book reviewer and author interviewer for NBC's Weekend Today in New York. He's also the founding editor of the book site of the New York Times on the web. This evening's event also includes an audience Q&A. Please use the Q&A button that's at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask a question at any time. And if someone has typed a question that you'd also like to know the answer to, you can even upvote that particular question. Perhaps most importantly, please support Bill and Alison and Bill and Powell's by purchasing copies of all their books from us. Links to buy them will be shared in the chat a couple of times this evening. Bill, Alison, and Bill, I'm so excited to welcome you tonight. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here, and I love Alison's books and also Bill's books. So it was a very flattering invitation to be here tonight with both of them. So I wanted to start with a question. I mean, you both write obviously about your own personal experiences with exercise, but Bill, since your book is just published or very recently, I mean this year, and Alison's was published last year. When Alison's book came out, did you feel like, oh my God, this is my subject, why is Alison writing a book about this? Or did you feel good that you had, as you do, have a very different take on it? I'm just curious about like how an author looks at a book that has a similar subject within a year of their own publication.
I was excited to read it. I'd read Fun Home and loved it. And, that's happened to me before with earlier books of mine where I had a book on the history of blood called 5 Quarts. And sure enough, like a few months before my book was published, someone else came out with a history of blood. It's just something you have to deal with. But Alison's take on exercise and her journey was so beautiful and fascinating, and there were definitely overlaps, which I loved seeing, but a different form as a graphic memoirist and artist, and I loved it. So it's such a pleasure to be here with you, Alison.
Likewise, Bill. I have to say, I while I was still working on my book, I knew that you were working on a book about exercise, and I did feel some anxiety about it.
Of course, it's
Put that
natural.
right out there.
Well, so Bill, you didn't feel you needed to revise the ending of your book, I noticed, to include Alison, or in your experience of what other people were saying and doing about exercise. But what's interesting, I mean, your book, Bill, is called Sweat. Alison, your book is The Secret to Superhuman Strength. But so much of this, of what you both write about, is not the physical act of exercise, but so much about the mental states that exercise is either provoked by or induces. And so I wonder if you could each tell me, I mean, Bill, let's start with you. I mean, you go back even further in history than Alison does in the way she frames, her story of her own superhuman strength. But can you tell me about literally the history of exercise and where your quest to find the beginning of exercise began, and how that related to the mentality of it?
Well, the quest began really in the gym. That's where I got the idea for my book. I was in a gym about 12 years ago, and on a Stairmaster machine, my old school cardio machine of choice. And I paused before starting the program and looked out at the gym floor and just thought, how did we all end up here in gyms? People, lifting weights, doing chin-ups, pull-ups, yoga on Bosu balls. And I just thought, how did we all end up here? And it was just a question. I went to the library thinking I would find a book on the history of exercise, and I didn't. And I think a kind of light bulb went on or off, whatever the phrase is, and thought that could be an interesting topic. But it took me a couple of years to get started. Other things took precedence. But yeah, it was a long journey working on this book. I think Alison had a long journey too. I'd love to hear about that. But yeah, it took about 10 years from beginning to end. And I think the moment that I really knew I had a book was at the New York Academy of Medicine Rare Books Room, where a librarian introduced me to Girolamo Mercuriali's 1569 book on exercise, De Arte Gymnastica, which was the first comprehensive book on exercise, illustrated as well. And something about that book, though written in medieval Latin, so that I could not read a word of it, except I could make out the word exercise, exercitatio. I just had a feeling that was the beginning of the journey. I made, the book was a challenge to write. And one of the challenges was feeling like I can't write an entire encyclopedia of exercise, and I have to create some boundaries. And so I made a deliberate decision not to write about things that I knew well, like from my own lifetime, not a lot about that, but to really dig into the deeper history. So to go into ancient Greece and Rome and the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, which is when Mercuriali lived, and the 19th century and so forth.
Well, so the past for you too, Alison, is very important. I mean, and your book is obviously more overtly an autobiography. I mean, although in Sweat there is a lot of memoir and autobiography too. But what's so beautiful about it is the long lineage of progressive-minded writers, as you call them. I mean, and you go back into the 18th, early, the Romantics. I mean, so we're in the late 18th century, early 19th century, and then with American transcendentalist writers in the 19th century in America, and then to the Beats. I mean, and so can you tell me about how you sort of found that lineage, or was that something that you knew going in you wanted to sketch in?
Wait, I just want to say something connected to what Bill was saying, and then I will answer that question. I like, part of the conceit of my book is that exercise didn't exist until the year I was born. I didn't do any research about the history of exercise. I didn't want to know, because I liked the idea that, around about 1960, people became so sedentary, they had to start doing something about it. But I understand now that that is a gross oversimplification, and that there have been real like schools of exercise around for a long time. It's fascinating. But the way I ended up with this cast of writer characters who are in my book was, it started with Jack Kerouac, because I always really loved his book, The Dharma Bums. I can't say I'm a fan of Kerouac, but that book I really love, just for the way he talks about the West and the mountains, the Cascades and the Sierras, and hanging out with Gary Snyder and hiking in these wild places, just always really captivated me. And I knew that I wanted to somehow use that book in my book. And Kerouac led me to his inspiration. One of his inspirations was the Transcendentalists, was Emerson and Thoreau. And I have been fascinated with Margaret Fuller ever since I learned about her. So she fit very nicely into this story. I loved the way these people all were they were outside and, doing things in nature, but they were very caught up with like the idea of the self. They were all trying to get outside of their individual selves in a way that I found very compelling. And then that took me back to the British Romantics, Coleridge and the Wordsworths. And then I just had this little gang that I followed throughout my book.
Well, I mean, you say that you didn't want to write a history of exercise. Exercise began with when you were born, basically. And what's interesting is Bill actually proves that. I mean, in a certain way. I mean that he talks about this long history of exercise. I mean, and obviously back to the ancient Greeks and Romans, and then this Middle Ages book that he found. I guess it's the Italian Renaissance, though, at that point. And yet he says until the 1950s, no one really had proof that exercise had any good effect. I mean, there was a kind of assumption that it was. So Bill, can you talk about that? Because it really does coincide with Alison's life and your life and my life, for that matter, the 50s, and then in the 60s with the President's Council on Physical Fitness.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, most people think of exercise as a purely modern construct, modern phenomenon, for a good reason. It was in the mid 1950s that indisputable scientific evidence for the benefits of exercise were demonstrated with different scientific studies, starting with an important person in England, Jeremy Morris. But yeah, for centuries before that, there was just an intuitive understanding from Hippocrates, Plato, Aristotle, Galen in the 2nd century on, that exercise was good for you, that it was good not only for you physically, but for your state of being, for your mental state of being as well. And this was certainly true with Mercuriali in the 16th century. So they had a kind of intuitive understanding that it was good for you, and that it should be moderate, and that it should be part of your daily life, advocating something as simple as walking. But what's important to remember is that they did not have an accurate scientific understanding of how the human body works until the 17th, 18th century, which is really where Alison comes in with the Romantics. Because it was William Harvey who discovered the circulation of the blood by the beat of the heart, who really discovered how the human body works. Up until then, there was the belief in the 4 humors, which reigned for something like 14 centuries. The belief that the body was made up of 4 separate humors, fluids that had to be kept in balance. So whether it was Hippocrates or Mercuriali, they were writing about exercise with that perspective.
And what's interesting, I mean, about what you just said, and it's in your book and also in Alison's, is the connection between the mind and the body. I mean, that people are not only exercising. I mean, Alison, you put yourself through a lot through your whole life. I mean, in terms of strenuous, I don't even want to say exercise, regimes. I mean, karate, skiing. I mean, all of these things that you do, running. I mean, biking. intensely, not only, well, not really, it seems, out of any kind of physical vanity, but a certain kind of inner need. And what is so moving to me about your book, and then also reflected in your book, Bill, is you, Alison, say about these progressive-minded writers that, like me, they were intent on some kind of inner transformation. So if you could both talk about how the physical activity leads to a kind of inner transformation, and how you saw that as you were working on your book, Alison, which is about your life and then living your life, and Bill, how you sort of framed that, because even someone like Jane Fonda is talking about a larger kind of transformation than doing workouts.
I just want to say something about being a lesbian, which is that when I was a young person, if you had enough time, you had the leisure to exercise and you were able-bodied enough to exercise, you just kept that to yourself. That was like, good, you can do that, but we don't all want to hear about it. So I think that like social atmosphere shaped my inward quest. Like it really wasn't about vanity, or I was living in this lesbian feminist community where you weren't supposed to think about how you looked. And so that's why my quest went inward, I think.
Mm-hmm. I really love that about your book, about how it's so much about the secret to superhuman strength is about inner strength and resilience and self-awareness and insight, which does come with exercise, I think.
I think so too.
It's like your book makes an argument for exercise in a very indirect way about gaining knowledge about yourself. There's a great quote in my book from Colin McGinn, a philosopher, who says, "The erudite body is a good body to have." In other words, the more physical information you can have about how your body works and what you can do, the better you know yourself.
Can you say something, Bill, about growing up as a gay boy, and whether you were physically active? I mean, when you said that, Alison, about any desire to do physical activity, or like you kept that quiet, all I could think of was, well, when I was growing up as a gay boy in Brooklyn, I had no ability to do any kind of physical activity, and that was never a secret. And if I could only have kept that ineptitude a secret, I would have been so happy.
Yeah, I think we had very different perspectives. I grew up as the only son of a West Point graduate athlete, West Point swim team. And my way of rebelling in a certain way was not to be athletic. When I look back on my life, I think, why didn't I turn out for track and field, and why wasn't I on the football team and the baseball team? Because I think I had that ability, but it was sort of my way of rebelling against my dad. I wanted to be a poet, not a football player. And then in, coming out in the early 1980s in San Francisco, right when AIDS surfaced, the whole culture for gay men in San Francisco was very much centered around gyms, and gyms became an important, almost like community center or social aspect of dealing with the pandemic in San Francisco and AIDS back in the 80s. And there was much more of an emphasis on physical beauty, not just health, but on building a muscular body, partly to fight against the disease, progression of HIV/AIDS, but also just purely for vanity. So very, very different, very different.
Well, Alison, you also talk about the AIDS era. I mean, and what it represented. I mean, I was startled, and it made so much sense. You talk about how hairlessness, that came into vogue was, in theory at least, a way of showing that the body was healthy, that that it couldn't hide, hairlessness could not hide any kind of physical decline. And so it was in that way, in a certain sense, a kind of boast. And, then Bill, you had a slightly different take. I mean, you didn't talk about hairlessness, but that same sense of physical strength as a way of being a living member of a community and proving one's health in a certain way, like almost like the way peacocks have, tail feathers. I mean, like, okay, I am a healthy, functioning person, an attractive mate.
Yeah, it's very Darwinian, very Darwinian. And I, in doing my research, it was not just historical, but also scientific, and looking at how we evolved as human beings, how we came to walk and become bipedal and to run, and how we developed sweat glands and why we sweat, and shed hair, became hairless, unlike our primate brothers and sisters. So yeah, I tried to weave together history, science, and then kind of my own history of exercise in the book.
Well, Alison, I mean, you talked about sort of the discipline of physical exercise and how that leads to a certain kind of mental state. I mean, can you talk about, since you both addressed how long the book took you, Bill, and Alison, in your book, you talk about, you thought after, I think not after Fun Home, but after Are You My Mother? Wait, no, Are You My Mother?
No, that's true. I was going to bang out this really quick.
Right, bang out this, yes. And how it took you, if maybe it didn't take you 15 years, but like it took Bill, but it's interesting that you're both writing about your own physical discipline to do all these things, and yet part of the issue in writing is that mental discipline does not always lead to quick writing, as I think most writers would be able to say.
No, my process was very protracted. In a way, the way I explain it now is because of how I set the book up. I was writing about each chapter was a decade of my life. So I actually, to make the conceit work, I had to live through the latest decade of my life. So that's why it took me 8 years to write it. I had to live through that time. But I was also really trying to induce in myself the kind of flow state, the kind of ease and confidence and spontaneity that I'm writing about, that Kerouac was, always aspiring to, that all these people were aspiring to. But you can't just will that, you can't engineer it, you can't just make it happen, sadly. But I feel like eventually I kind of did. I got in a groove with this thing. And I finished it.
Alison, I would love to hear more about your process. Like, did you know from the beginning that it would have that structure and that you would include the beat poets and the romantics? And
no, I have a crazy process. All that stuff like evolved over a long period of time, and it was kind of in a way just born out of my love of reading biographies. I just like was chain reading these, books about these people and starting to see, some way that they fit together, some narrative that their stories were telling that connected to my own. But it takes forever, and I never had a sense that I was on the right track. It was just like a mess.
Well, I put my book aside for 3 or 4 years. I just almost abandoned it because I just couldn't figure it out. And I wrote other books. I wrote a memoir, I did a book of photography. And then I came back to it really during the pandemic, when I had so much time alone here in this apartment, and also felt an obligation just to finish the damn thing. And the pandemic, that was one upside. We were talking about upsides to the pandemic.
But Bill, you also had like an injury or something, I forget, but you stopped exercising for a while.
I did. I really did. I had really bad plantar fasciitis, which is just really inflammation in the soles of your feet. I had some shoulder injuries. I tore a rotator cuff, weightlifting. I don't know, they all sound like excuses now. Excuses not to write or exercise. But yeah, and also my partner died. You know, Oliver died in 2015, and exercise was a part of our life. We swam together 2 or 3 times a week. It was very joyful and fun, and would work out at the gym together, or I'd see him at the gym. That was a reason to go to the gym. It was a reason to work out, you know, to look good for your partner. And we talk about it. And I don't know, after his death, everything just went silent. Everything went silent. And there were other responsibilities that came up. Other things took over. And I ended up writing a memoir, Insomniac City, which combined a memoir of my life in New York and with Oliver and my street photography. And somehow looking back, I feel like it was all kind of meant to be. Because when I came back to Sweat to finish it, I think actually the distance really helped. That suddenly it was like seeing that, you know, having a jigsaw puzzle and seeing the pieces that need to go in the right place to finish the puzzle. And I suddenly kind of knew how to complete the book in a way that I hadn't 5 years earlier.
Uh-huh. I just want to say I love how you write about swimming, and I love how Oliver has written about swimming. I hate to swim. It's like one thing I just don't do, but I wish I did, because it sounds really great.
I swam today, and thinking about this tonight. Well, I envy you and your bicycling and your cross-country skiing and all of the things that you do in your book and describe so amazingly.
So Alison, are you going to try swimming again after you see what joy it gave Bill and Oliver? And Bill, will you start biking intensely?
I keep sort of making a challenge for myself. I'm really going to learn to swim, but I know I won't do it. I don't like the water. My mother was a great swimmer. Perhaps it has something to do with that.
I totally get it. And I'm a complete chicken when it comes to bicycling. I live in New York, and you know, there are bikes everywhere. There's city bikes, and I'm kind of a chicken when it comes to bicycling.
That's a good policy in the city.
Yeah, I've heard too many stories about people getting hurt, or, you know, the car door going open and the bicycle is flipping over. So maybe if I lived in rural Vermont and could do bicycling in the country, I would do it.
Yeah.
Well, in writing, I mean, in writing about Oliver, and in many of your books, Bill, I mean, what's wonderful about your writing, I mean, each of your books really, I mean, except for Insomniac City, really, are science history, but also woven with the personal experience of writing the book, and then also personal memoir. I mean, when you were working on this book, how did you sort of balance the travelogue aspect of it with the personal story, with giving a history of exercise? Because you do all three. I mean, and they're all sort of seamlessly done in that.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, well, it took a long time, and I think that's one reason why I set the book aside. I just got overwhelmed, and I couldn't figure out how to structure that. I had written books with a similar hybrid structure of medical or scientific history with memoir or personal narrative, my first 3 books. But there was something about this book that was overwhelming. I think the experience, I did most of the research, or a lot of the research for this book from 2013 to 2015. I got a Guggenheim Foundation grant in 2013, and I used most of that money to travel and do research for Sweat, and did a huge amount, and then set it aside and wrote Insomniac City, a memoir, and other books. And I sort of liken it to dancing, where, you know, one person is sort of, if you're dancing as a couple, like one person is sort of the lead, and figuring out, okay, who's the lead here? Is it the history or is it the memoirist? And figuring out, for Sweat at least, that the memoirist sort of had to take the lead in this dance that is the book. And so the book opens with me plunging into a very cold mountain lake in the Adirondacks, a fall day, a beautiful fall day in the Adirondacks, I still remember. And the water was something like 50 degrees, but I just couldn't resist. And I felt like I needed to open the book with that kind of personal, very physical experience described almost like a film slowed down moment by moment by moment to tell the reader, like, this is going to be as much about my own experience of exercise as it is about the history of exercise.
You know, maybe this is weak-minded of me, but I just want to know about writers' own selves. I mean, I'm interested in the, you know, the nonfiction subject matter that you're writing about, but it's so much more interesting through the lens of your particular experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I mean, I would say that's what your work is too, Allison. I mean, this book in particular, I mean, obviously all your memoirs are about yourself. That's what memoir is. But this book, it more than the other two, although there's, in your second book, there's also that link to a history of you know, Winnicott and child psychology. I mean, and here you, as we've discussed, have the romantics and then the beats and the transcendentalists. I mean, it does seem as if your mind as well as your body is on a quest in this book, and that's what the narrative is. I mean, it goes into history. One of the things I wanted to say earlier when you were talking about Margaret Fuller is I'm sure that your book is the only book in the world that references as a touch point both the movie Rocky and Margaret Fuller. I'm pretty confident that it is a unique work in that sense.
I like that. Yeah, but that was also very confusing and tricky to figure out how to braid all that stuff together. And my process of writing entailed a lot of just removing stuff about my own life. Like, there was so much more personal stuff in there that just didn't fit. It was taking away from my other themes, and I had to get rid of it, which was good.
Well, and so obviously your book is not just text, is not just print. So can you talk about your process in creating the illustrations, the drawing narrative that includes Margaret Fuller, Jack Kerouac, I mean, your father, your mother, your family, I mean, your lovers. How does that work in not so much combining the text and the illustrations, but then how do you make the illustrations tell a story as well, especially since, you know, some of it is costume drama. I noticed in the acknowledgements you even thank one of the people that you thank is, you know, that helping you with the costuming of the time.
Yeah. I don't know how I do that. It's just a thing. It's just like how people write comics. I can't explain it. But I love having access, you know, to pictures as well as words to tell the stories. And it was fun going back in history, you know, especially when I'd be looking at my own early 20s in New York City and comparing that to Margaret Fuller's early 20s in Cambridge, and or I don't know, I just liked finding those parallels through time with these other people. And it's very quick to, using images, you don't have to explain anything. You're all of a sudden you're there. You're in the Sierras in the 1950s. You're in the Quantock Hills in 1797. You just do it.
Did you notice, I mean, did it come through the writing that you noticed the sort of synchronicity in a certain sense of Margaret Fuller's life story and the decades as it was relating to your own? Or was that something that you discovered in the writing, or was that something as you were researching you realized, you know, that's a link?
I would notice links as I was researching, but then the trick was to make that fit into a story, into some kind of a narrative, which I'm not sure how that works in the end. But I just loved immersing myself in these people's lives and looking for points of contact and similarity. you know, like struggling to get some kind of guidance from their lives.
It's also very beautiful in your book, the way you tell the story, you know, that comes down to us almost obliquely of the sexuality of the Wordsworth, Dorothy and William Wordsworth and Coleridge, and then the Emerson and his sexual. I mean, you know, it was just, and then Kerouac and the Beats. I mean, just the alternative sexual history that you're giving there that links them to your own experience, I found extremely beautiful looking, but also very moving. You know,
Oh, good. Yeah, that was something. It was funny to see all of their like ridiculous romantic travails. That made me feel a little better. Like they had some serious intimacy issues, these people.
So that gave you comfort.
Yes.
Bill, I mean, can you talk about I mean, you write obviously about your own experience during the AIDS years, and also your relationship both with Oliver Sacks and your lover before that, whose name was Steve. And I found both the way in which you explore your own sexuality and how it relates to, you know, the physicality that is either part of exercise or isn't part of exercise. You know, it all changes. But there was so moving how you describe being at the gym with Steve, your late lover. Can you tell the story of that? Because death in so many ways hovers over your book, as well as Alison's. And you know, Alison, you even say the thing about changing your life is that change is moving on, and moving on leads essentially to one place, the grave. I mean, so, you know, the way in which death hangs over even this idea of exercise and superhuman strength.
Yeah, I think it does hang over both books. I really noticed that. The question of mortality, I mean, exercising to beat mortality. And AIDS was just that period was such a powerful instance of that. I mean, really working out to fight the illness. And, you know, there was this syndrome called wasting syndrome, which was very common at the time. And my partner, Steve, had that. And it was a defining aspect of having HIV/AIDS. And to fight that, you worked out. You gained as much muscle as you possibly could. And yeah, Steve and I met at the gym, at a gym called Muscle System, the kind of gym that I'm not even sure they exist anymore. It was a gay gym. And there was a lesbian gym in San Francisco as well, a women's only gym, a men's only gym. They were very important to a sense of community and to that period. And Steve and I met at the gym. It really was a kind of love at first sight thing. I'm not being corny. I remember him, seeing him doing seated rows with, you know, like a back exercise. And
You like to perform.
Yeah, falling for him in that moment. The chapter about AIDS, which is really about the 1980s, it was important to me in the book. It comes toward the end of the book. Stylistically, it's maybe a little bit different. It's a very personal chapter. It's very much heavy on memoir, whereas the other chapters of the book, there's more of a balance of history and memoir. But I really wanted, especially because of the pandemic we're in now, the COVID pandemic, which I do write about a little bit, I really wanted to plunge the reader into what that was like. So few of us, I mean, Alison and Bill, you both remember, but so many people don't remember what that was like. And I wanted to plunge the reader into what that experience was like in San Francisco in the late 80s and early 90s.
Alison, can you say something about the way in which your death hovers over your book? I mean, if you could sum it up in a few minutes before we go to questions from the audience. I perhaps should have ended on an up note, but
No, this is great. This is perfect. I always feel that my preoccupation with mortality is the result of growing up in a funeral home. My dad ran a funeral home, and I just got exposed to death from a very young age. And I could see that it was inevitable. It was part of life. I was going to die. I knew that. I feel like that was a gift. Like most kids of my era people shielded them from death, but we were just, I mean, and then my father did some like crazy things, like actually showing us dead bodies, which probably was a bad idea, but I feel like that is all really good to know. You know, I want to know what's going to happen to me. I want to be ready for it. I've been working all my life toward coming to terms with the fact that I'm going to die. And it's funny because you can't just will that either. That's a process. And as I'm learning as I get older, you can't do a lot of it until you reach a certain age. It's just not accessible to you. But I feel like for me, the more I can come to terms with death, the fuller my life actually can be. You know, that I can let go of a lot of my petty anxieties and just move forward to that grave.
Well, I mean, so much of I mean, Fun Home for me was both a revelation and also a sort of confirmation. I mean, my father died when I was 9, and so when AIDS happened, I mean, in the early 80s, and I was in my 20s. I mean, the whole idea of death and early death and death at a young age was not new to me. I mean, not a surprise. I mean, it didn't mean that I wanted to die or that it made it any easier when young people I knew, close friends, did die. But there was nothing surprising about early death in a way that I found, I don't want to say comforting, because that's too extreme, but it's just, it wasn't a surprise. Both my grandfathers had been dead before I was born. So, and I think what you say about a lot of people who are sort of shielded intentionally, even from the reality of death, just death was always a reality to me. And Bill, I mean, that's, you write so much about the body, blood. I mean, but even your book about blood, I mean, is not only about blood as a life-giving thing, but, the shadow of infection and HIV. And, I find that very beautiful in both, in the work, both of your works. I mean, that there is that
Yeah.
that, I don't want to say embrace of death, because that's embrace of the reality of death, and not afraid to depict it and to deal with it.
Yeah, I've always been really fascinated by the body, the human body, which led me to write, especially those first 3 books, a book on sleep and insomnia called Sleep Demons, the book on blood, and then The Anatomist, which tells the story behind Gray's Anatomy, 19th century text, where I actually studied anatomy alongside med students at UCSF for a year and did full cadaver dissection. So I really got to see inside the body in a way that Hippocrates and Galen and Plato never did. So it's definitely always runs through all of my work, and certainly in Sweat. You referenced earlier that it was not until the mid-1950s that scientists established indisputably that exercise can extend your life and has health benefits. And yet, when people ask me about exercise, I say, don't do it because it'll make you think it'll make you live longer. Do it for exercise for how it makes you feel now, in your body right now, about your body, about your life. Find a form of exercise, whether it's bicycling or running or swimming or dancing in your apartment, that makes you feel good now. That's the most important thing.
And also, you quote a personal trainer in your book saying, well, people exercise because they want to look good and get laid. So
they want to look good. They want to look good naked, is what I said.
Okay. Oh, well, I mean, I was trying to be a little less explicit, but no, but I mean, it's true, as we've been saying all throughout, that the physical discipline of exercise and the mental discipline exercising and thinking are interrelated, but there is that whole other level of people looking good and why they want to look good. So
Sure.
Okay, so well, thank you. I mean, we're going to go to questions from the audience. So I want to thank Bill, Hayes, and Allison for this, and I hope you're ready for more questions, but not from me. And also to the people in the audience, I mean, post your questions in the Q&A if you have them, and I will begin with the ones that are here now. From Zane Barrow, Allison, you have been at the forefront of proving that graphic novels, graphic memoirs are literature. Do you still feel that there is pushback that you face? And do you think the response is different for nonfiction works like The Secret to Superhuman Strength than fiction works?
I feel like that. I'm sorry, I don't have an articulate answer prepared for that. I don't feel like comics is getting, I feel like comics has arrived, and I don't feel like I have to defend what I do anymore. I don't feel like I have to push back against anything. I feel like it's all pretty cool.
The second question from Alice Gray is, in the Zoom backgrounds, we are getting a peek into the creative, are we getting a peek into the creative spaces where your writing occurs? So Allison, I know that behind you, you have file cabinets and a large desk. So, and with cubby holes.
Ooh, show us something.
I can't find anything interesting, but this is a lot of this is all my art from my book. Here's a picture of the.
Yes.
I remember that.
That's
Yeah.
gorgeous. Yes.
Yeah, this is my studio.
And Bill, unless you write at the piano,
Which I do not do.
so tell us about your workspace and your creative space.
It is right here. It is this desk and this computer. I write on a computer, and but yeah, this is where I work. This is where I work.
And how was it writing this book in the apartment that had been Oliver's as opposed to the apartment that you had of your own before? Was it different? I mean, to be writing this book in a different space?
That's a great question. I moved in here in early 2019. I renovated the whole apartment. So I made it very different. I made it my own in a way, made it the kind of space I wanted to live and work in, and just found it so conducive. I wrote a book about the pandemic, the first 100 days of the pandemic, called How We Live Now, which was both writing and photography. I'm also a photographer. And it was utter joy. I mean, that book took 3 months to write and photograph, unlike Sweat, which took 10 or 12 years. So every book is different. And yeah, I have very fond memories of working on How We Live Now in that intensive 3-month period. And then Sweat, just working it out. I don't want to, no pun intended, but just getting through it to finishing the book and doing it all here.
Emmy Waldman asks, Allison's memoir describes so many exercise fads, sports, regimes, but the relation between exercise and the physical and mental discipline of drawing, making comics, remains richly and suggestively implicit. Allison, can you tell us a little bit about how you conceptualize your creative practice in terms of exercise?
Hi, Emmy. Good question. I've always felt that my strength, my endurance that I have for physical activities directly gets poured into my creative process, especially the drawing, because it is completely physical. Drawing is a physical activity in a way that writing isn't. I mean, I'm sitting here at my computer in my chair that I sit here and write, but when I'm drawing, I'm over here at my drawing table,
Mm.
and I'm standing. And it's just much more, I just feel much more alive, much more connected. I'm moving my whole body to draw stuff. I'm jumping up and down and doing poses for sketches that I have to make. And it's a very, very physical thing, the drawing process. So, and I feel like some of that comes through in the lines, like it's moving, there's a movement to it all.
Mm-hmm. Is there one or the other that is more, I don't know what to say, like more difficult for you, writing versus the art?
The writing is more difficult. I mean, I like them both, and I need them both, but the drawing is always more fun. Maybe because I kind of do the writing first, and the drawing is just like the icing on the cake.
And in this book, aren't there sort of slightly different styles? Sometimes you have these really beautiful loose washes of black.
Yeah, there are.
I love that.
That was my attempt at like being more spontaneous, doing these occasional sort of sumi style brush drawings, because you can't sketch, you can't really prepare those. They just have to come out of you. Yeah. My normal way of drawing is very laborious and has many layers of preparatory sketches.
It had the feeling of certain forms of exercise, like skiing. When you describe skiing, it feels good when it becomes very loose. And sometimes the art reflected that.
It's exactly that same experience. It's the flow state that I'm always questing after.
Yeah.
I'm so curious, you say that you write the text first and then the drawings come later. I mean, do you write the text then to fit, where you it will be on the page with the drawings, or is it longer and then you edit it to fit around the drawings?
I write in panels, like in a drawing program, so it's all very visual. It's a kind of drawing. I'm just not putting the drawings in, but I know what they're going to be as I'm conceiving it.
So when you're writing the text, do you think in those short, relatively short panel-like texts? I remember when I used to write short reviews for Publishers Weekly, I found it very difficult to write longer reviews after doing that.
It's a super compressed format. And Bill, reading your book, I just love that you could go on and on with all kinds of words about things. I couldn't do that. I had to just cruise stuff down mercilessly.
No surprise. I wish I were you. I could just write little paragraphs.
Well, that leads to very naturally to the next question. From Mary Finneran. Can you say something about your editors? What guidance did he or she give you? What did you fight over?
I've had the same wonderful editor for all 7 of my books, which is pretty unusual. Her name is Nancy Miller, and she's amazing. Patience is the first word I would think of, because this book was due back in 2015 or something. It took many more years than that. And after Oliver died and I was sort of stuck and in this state, Sweat was maybe half finished, but I had this idea in the back of my mind to write a memoir about my life in New York, my life with Oliver. And she knew, because she'd seen it, that I had been doing a tremendous amount of street photography, really just for my own creative soul. And it was Nancy who came to me and said, maybe 4 or 5 months after Oliver died, maybe it's time for you to, don't think about Sweat. Maybe it's time for you to think about a memoir and think about writing about Oliver and incorporating your photography. And the moment she said it, we were having a drink. I still remember it. And I said, that is such a great idea. It was such a relief that I wouldn't have to work on Sweat, that I could do something, that I could do something different, drawing on a different part of my creative life. And that book too came really quickly. And she waited patiently for Sweat, which finally I finished during the pandemic. We don't really fight over anything. That was part of the question. What do you fight over? No, it's a very supportive relationship.
Yeah,
Allison, have you-
I don't
Allison,
fight
can
with
you
my
tell us
editor.
about some fights?
I wish I had some good fights for you, but I am so indebted to my editor. This is my third book I worked on with Deanne Ermey, she has some freakish ability to look at my undrawn comics pages and know what they're about and where they're going. Like I don't do all this drawing, until the writing is firmed up. So she has to look at just empty panels and descriptions of things. And she's really great at that. And she's, my struggle is always, I have too much stuff, and she's really good at cutting stuff out, I guess if you want to fight, I'll think of a little fight. I know. I kept in this perverse way insisting on enumerating all the books I was working on over the years. Like when my third book came out, my girlfriend dumped me. And then when my fourth book came out, and she was like, we really don't care about how many books there were. And eventually I was able to kind of compress that, but I couldn't let go of all of it. I needed the detail.
It wasn't a fight, but one of my weaknesses is openings and endings. And Nancy Miller is so good about nudging me to try something different for an opening or an ending. That was true of Sweat and of Insomniac City and How We Live Now and all of them.
Caution Paley Ellison asked, what is the experience of intimacy with your bodies through exercise and your relationships with being open and intimate with others, friends and partners?
Wow.
I mean, Allison, that's very much a subject of your book, but
yeah. You're first.
I mean, sorry. My cat is doing something, but it's okay. For me, my body is like what gets me out of my head, what makes me real, what enables me to just be here on Earth and in the world with other people, which is hard for me. So the kind of activities I do with friends, the kind of just exertion I do on my own, it's just all very grounding. It's what enables me to be present, as present as I am for other people and for relationship. So it's really crucial to me that I exercise.
Yeah, I felt that in the pool today as I swam, just forgetting about myself in a way and thinking about how many laps I have swum and the technique, focusing just on not what I'm worried about or anxious about or stressed out about, but just the technique of doing freestyle. And, I talked about the opening of the book where I plunge into a lake and swim as far as I can before, I lose my breath and get back onto the dock, scramble up, freezing, dry off of the towel. And someone asked me, like, why the hell would you do that? The lake is 50 degrees. It's freezing. And my answer was, because I can. And I think that, and it's not in a bragging way, it's more like I want to test my body's ability to do these things. I'm still healthy enough that I can do that.
I feel like for me, exertion is almost a form of being held in the way that I'm like coming up against the outside world. Like myself is, running up a hill. I'm experiencing gravity and, lifting weights. It's this contact similar to contact with another person. It's the proof that you exist.
About 20 years ago, I mean, when I worked out with a trainer and he was trying to get me to do this jumping exercise, and he said, I was not doing it well, and he said, you're afraid to put your body in motion. And what I mean, it was such a startling thing, because I realized that it was not only my fear of putting my body in motion. I mean, it really was a great insight to me and my entire life. I mean, it was a transformative moment. I mean, I don't remember the trainer's name. I feel guilty that I don't remember his name. We didn't work out together all that long, but it was so startling a revelation to me, and so much. I mean, I don't want to say everything in my life followed from that insight of his, but you know, I really thought about myself very differently, and a lot of the things that I'm most proud of doing in my life came after that. Now, I'm not saying there was a 1 + 1 = 2, but from what you're saying about physical exertion and what you were saying about plunging in, and I mean, that's really what my experience was from that insight. Another question, and then a couple of comments to close the conversation. So we'll be ending very soon. Glenda Burgess asks, can you both address how you settled on your book titles?
I knew it was going to be called Sweat from the very beginning, practically from when I had the idea. The subtitle, A History of Exercise, that took longer. I worried if it was called The History of Exercise, people would expect an encyclopedia covering the entire history of exercise. So we played with that a lot. But this was a title that was there pretty much from the beginning. I thought it just said what exercise is and can be about.
Yeah, I had my title from the get-go too. For me, it's an ad in the back of a comic book. I was always obsessed with like the bodybuilding ads and the He-Man things you could send away for the barbells and weight gaining drinks. But one day I saw an ad that promised the secret to superhuman strength. I've never been able to actually find it again. I've like gone through all kinds of old comics, but I vividly remember that and emblazoned in my mind ever since.
Before we get to the final comment, I wanted to read a comment from Emmy Waldman. There's such a neat resonance between the opening of Sweat, she writes, plunging into the cold water, and the motif across Alison's books, the dream of plunging into the brook, for example, which opens Are You My Mother and returns in Superhuman Strength.
Nice.
Yeah, that's very much there. It's too bad I'm not a swimmer and I could actually make a real plunge. Good one, Emmy.
Well, and you know, that links to my book, since Mrs. Dalloway begins with "What a lark, what a plunge." So
Right.
you know, so they're plunging all around. I wanted to close with a comment from Rich Ulring, who says, "Cousin Billy and Alison, I hope that when you both write your next books, you'll come to Powell's books in person. Bill, all of your siblings and 14 first cousins are very proud of you. Cousin Richie in Portland, Oregon, only a few miles from Powell's books in Northwest Portland. Congratulations to you both."
Oh, that's great.
So sweet. Thank you. Hey, Cousin Richie.
So yes, I hope that we'll all be live and in person at Powell's at some point in the future. I know when I did a talk there about my book, The World Broken Too, it was one of the highlights of my life to see my name on the marquee, and I took photographs of it, you know, both during the day and at night. And you know, so luckily our hotel was right around the corner, so there were many excuses to walk by and see it. But Kathy Perko also from Portland seconds. I second the hope for an in-person event in Portland. Loving this wonderful conversation this evening. Thank you both. And I thank you both. And I thank you, Powell's store, for inviting all three of us to be here.
Yeah, this was really fun. Thank you.
It was really fun. Thank you.
It's the most fun I've ever had on President's Day.
Well, thanks everyone for the talk, and everyone at home. There's Bill's book, Sweat. There's Alison's book right there, her newest one. The links to buy these books were shared in the chat earlier this evening. And look, there's Bill G's book right there.
You guys, this book is amazing. I'm reading it right now. Buy it. Buy it.
Highly recommended. I'm going to put a link to our YouTube channel in the chat as well. Make sure to click on that, everyone at home, and you can check out all of the other events that we've had here. This event will be going up on our YouTube channel probably sometime tomorrow. So if you know people that you'd like to share it with, and or you know people who missed it, feel free to share it and tell others about it. Thanks again, everyone at home. Allison, Bill, and Bill, thank you so much. Such an honor to have you here. And we'll see you in the store sometime soon, I hope.
Yeah.
Thank you
I hope-
all.
All right, have a good night.
Bye.